This is a conversation with Missy Zombor, who's running for a seat on the Milwaukee Public School Board. The citywide election is on April 4th. Enjoy. So Missy, let's start with the most Midwest question. Where did you grow up?
I've lived in Wisconsin my whole life. I grew up in a little town called North Prairie.
Did you go to a public school growing up?
I did, yeah. I was in the Mugwanago School District, so I went to Prairie View Elementary, lived on Prairie View Drive in North Prairie, Wisconsin. So I knew how to spell prairie, which is a very tough word to spell. But yeah, I went to public schools, kindergarten through high school, and had, just a really great experience in my public school. We had shop classes, driver's ed, really kind of all the things that you want for your children.
And so what made you decide to run for the school board?
My family actually immigrated here. Most of my family is from Germany, and they immigrated to Milwaukee. So now that we're back in the city, I'm the fourth generation in my family to live here. I've always been drawn to Milwaukee. I think, it's a great place to buy a home, raise a family. It's a great place to work. Everything's nearby. And so when my husband and I had our son, Max, we moved into the city when he was in second grade.
And where did he go to school?
He went to Niskara Elementary his first year.
Is that part of MPS?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's Milwaukee Public Schools.
Did Max's experiences in the MPS system growing up help inform your idea of what the school board should do and where you'd like to see MPS in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think actually because Max transferred from another district that was more well-funded and had more resources, we saw the really stark contrast between what students in the suburbs get versus students in the city. And I think that has made us fight even harder to make sure that every student in Milwaukee Public Schools can have what every parent wants for their child.
What are those differences?
When Max went to Cushing Elementary, which is in the Kettle Moraine School District, and when he was in first grade, we went to his parent-teacher conferences, and we walked into the music room, and there were these hand-painted drums all along the walls. Every kid had a keyboard. There was a large piano for the teacher, and the teacher had Max sit down and he played the keyboard for us. Like, he played the piano in first grade, and we were just blown away by it. And then when we transferred to MPS, Niskara, he got music on a cart, maybe once a week by a nonprofit that would come in and help kind of fill the gaps. And so that experience was kind of disheartening. We have really amazing teachers in MPS. I think that's, one of our greatest assets, but the resources just aren't there compared to what other districts have.
And so what are the most pressing issues facing MPS today?
There's quite a few, but I think one of the main issues is this anti-public education movement that's really behind this manufactured crisis of defunding our public schools. There are people in the state legislature that have been working at chipping away local control of our public schools. They're belittling teachers, stealing their rights as workers. They want to transfer public assets into unaccountable private sectors, right? And you see this in our school district, but you also see it in transit. You see it in other parts of the city. You see it with our parks, with our land. So it's all tied. But I would say that this anti-public education movement has been really, really destructive, especially to Milwaukee Public Schools. And there's people that want to see our schools run like businesses instead of greenhouses of democracy that they should be. And so what that's translating into is, one, they're defunding our public schools through the state. This year, there was $0 in new per pupil funding from the state, even though we're sitting on a $5.6 billion budget surplus, right? And so Milwaukee Public Schools is only reimbursed 30% for special education students, even though 20% of our students are identified as students with disabilities. The Education Law Center estimates that that's over $150 million that we're underfunding our special education. You saw Tim Michaels running a campaign to break MPS up, right? They've tried this before. They tried a mayoral takeover of our public schools. They tried the takeover. They called it the opportunities. Well, we won't even call it that. It was the takeover plan, where they tried to come in and take some of our schools and hand them over to a private operator, and we fought that back. And so, they get us from the state, but then we also have private schools that come into the district, and then they come to the school board and they ask the school board for charter contracts. So we also see our buildings kind of, we have a couple private schools that are co-located. So you have a private school co-located with a public school. And then that's another way that they slowly eat away at the district. We know that sometimes those schools will poach MPS students. They have non-compete clauses actually in their contracts. And we know that there was one of the schools was putting flyers in kids' backpacks from the MPS school. The district approves them because they want the money, because they'll get some money from the enrollment numbers of those students. It's not as much as they would if the student was going to MPS. But they're unaccountable to the school board. The only thing the school board gets to decide is what their contract is. So if a parent comes to you and says, this privately operated charter school is doing this, maybe it's the start or end time, or maybe it's a room they're using, the school board can't say, well, we need to do this with that room. We need to do this with a certain end time. We shouldn't be doing this discipline policy with students, because the school board doesn't actually control them. The only thing the school board controls is their contract.
What does that translate to the student experience when you have them going to voucher schools or charter schools?
When students go to charter and voucher schools, you lose certain rights that you would have if you were in a public school. Like homeless students have certain rights in a public school. Students with special needs, students that are disabled have special rights. And privately operated schools don't have the same legal obligations to meet those needs. And so often they won't accept them, they'll counsel them out, or they just don't provide what the students need. So, as a parent, if I had a student with a special need, I would never send them to a privately operated school. I think another really pressing issue that MPS is facing is the teacher exodus. Right? You've seen what happened after Act 10. We've been losing educators. You have fewer and fewer people entering the teaching profession. It's very stressful, the amount of time that it takes to be a teacher. Society has really, what do I want to say about that? We just have a crisis right now and it's not unique to MPS, but it's worse in MPS, right? Because it's a very difficult school district to teach in, and we don't have the resources that would make teachers' jobs easier, right? Like, we need to have smaller class sizes to make it easier for teachers to give every student one-on-one attention that they deserve. But when the funding is tight, you have to pick and choose where the limited resources go. And so what ends up happening is you have higher class sizes, bigger class sizes for students, and then teachers get burned out.
So with these inflated class sizes and the move to privatization in Milwaukee, what can the school board do about that?
There's a few things we can do. So I think we have to hold the private charter schools more accountable, and we have to do things that make it easier for us to do that. So, for example, a lot of the private charter schools in MPS, they have a contract and they have a lease, and those don't always align. So sometimes what will happen is the school board will have a lease that's up for renewal, and they're like, well, we have to renew the lease because they still have some of the contract left. And so if we can align the contracts and the leases, I think it puts extra pressure on the charter school. Because if there is an issue, and we've had some very shady charter schools in MPS. Universal Academy was bribing one of our school board directors and closed. And so what would have happened if the lease and the contract were aligned? It would have been easier for the school board to say, no, this isn't working and we can't renew your charter, or, to put them on probation and say, you have to do better. We also, it would be really nice for someone to sit down and have an honest conversation with some of these schools about what it would mean to become instrumentality charters of the district. And what that means is, so there's an instrumentality chart, and actually this might be like too way in the weeds for an interview, but
I like it.
So there's what we call non-instrumentality, and these are the privately operated schools where the teachers are not employees of the district, right? So they're not going to be members of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association. Those are the schools that have their own contracts. And we also have instrumentality charter schools, and those are schools that are more true versions of the district, and they actually have employees who are employed by Milwaukee Public Schools. And so when the school board has a resolution, for example, like the sanctuary district resolution that would protect immigrant students against ICE agents, when MPS passed that, those are the schools that would fall under MPS policies, whereas you have the non-instrumentality charter schools that wouldn't fall under that. And so what does that mean for the students in a privately operated charter school or a non-instrumentality charter school? Does a sanctuary district policy apply to them? Like, probably not. And so, I mean, fundamentally, that's kind of what's at stake. And that's why we have to defend our democratically elected school board and make sure we keep that. Actually, there's a private charter school coalition in the city called City Forward Collective. And if you look at their website, they have some publications on there. And they've been doing some parent surveys and community surveys. And it looks like they're trying to build the case for a legislative policy change to actually make parts of the MPS school board be appointed either by the mayor or the common council instead of elected. And so they're trying to build the case through the survey. And the irony of it is most of the people in that group, their boards aren't even public. They don't even have a board, right? Like that they don't have a school board that's democratically elected. They have a CEO, and they maybe have some people who are like financial bankers or, whoever they find to do this, but they're not transparent about who are on their boards. They're not transparent about when they meet, what they talk about, how they're setting policies for the schools. So I think that's a big difference. And I think that's really interesting that they're advocating for that. I think it goes to show you that they're trying to get into the district any way they can. And so if they can't get people elected on the school board who will give them the sweetheart deal contracts that they want, they're just going to try to take it over.
Okay, so now that we've talked about all the issues facing the Milwaukee public school system, what does a successful MPS look like in 10 years in your mind?
So I think what we would want to see is a school district that's fully funded, a school district with small class sizes so students can have that one-on-one attention, especially in those early grades. A teacher needs to have time with students who might, be having a meltdown, right? Or crying or needs a hug or, had something happen in their family that they need to talk about. When you have 30 kids in a class, especially at the early grades, you don't get to give that one-on-one attention. So I think, first of all, our class sizes would be smaller. We would have more recess for our students because there would be less testing, less of these standardized tests that take up a lot of our time. We would have nutritious meals that students want to eat that, meet their dietary and religious needs. There'd be choices for the foods that they eat. We would have robust transportation options for all of our students. The buses would come on time. We would also have more restorative justice practices in our schools instead of punitive practices. So you would see, fewer suspensions. And, I think they would be really peaceful, enjoyable schools filled with joy. Educating students isn't a secret. Sometimes there's these groups, they go and they're like, oh, what do we have to do to increase test scores? It's not a secret. We know what works. We just need the funding to do it, the people to do it, the space to do it. It's not a secret. So, the other thing that parents would really love to see for their students is, in the higher grades, we want to prepare children for whatever they want to do in life, right? So we want them to be good critical thinkers. We want them to know how to be citizens in a democracy. We want them to be prepared for whatever career path it is that they want to take. So whether they want to go to college, get in the trades. And so especially at the higher levels, we want students to be able to start experiencing different opportunities that are afforded to people in other districts. And some of that's actually related to transportation. We have a lot of students in Milwaukee Public Schools that don't have a way to get to apprenticeships or internships, and it makes it really difficult for them to get those opportunities. So one of the ideas that I've had for some time now, and some of this goes back to my time working with the transit union. I've talked about this idea with folks at the transit union before, but it's to give Milwaukee Public School high school students bus passes. So we would give MPS high school students bus passes that are good 7 days a week, not just to and from school. People are like, oh, how are you going to fund that? I'm like, well, the city wanted to put a streetcar downtown to go around in circles, and it's free for tourists to go ride around downtown in circles. So if we can do that, we can find funding, we can find a way, whether it's donors, whether it's through climate grants, we should be able to find a way to get transportation for MPS students. And if MPS students had bus passes that they could use 7 days a week, it would increase the culture of transportation, especially at an early age. And those would be future riders, because we know that climate change is real, the climate crisis is here, and we need to do everything we can to reduce carbon emissions. And we're going to need more people to ride on public transportation to do that. So I think it's really looking towards the future, but also giving students those opportunities. I mean, we could also, MPS already buys, I think they have about over 2,000 students that have bus passes, MCTS passes. But, if we expanded that to every student and found a way to work with the county board, MPS, or, maybe some private funders, I think that would really go a long way. We also could look at providing support staff with bus passes. So we have a lot of food service workers. Actually, that's one of the reasons the district says we're having such a hard time providing better food, is because we're short hundreds of food service workers. And some of the food service workers I've met throughout the years, they take the bus. And so, if we could provide a bus pass to some of our food service workers or support staff, would that help them get to work and help them stay in the district?
So if you are elected to the board, what are the first steps you're going to take to making that vision a reality?
Well, for the bus passes specifically, I would love to see us build an actual coalition of students, teachers, transit union workers, elected leaders, maybe on the county board, a couple school board members, and let's sit down and let's talk to students and survey students to see what they actually need, right? To make sure that this is something they truly need. I mean, we think they do, but let's be sure. And find out what it would mean to them, and build a coalition so that the students can be there talking to maybe potential funders. They could be talking to the county board, because we're also going to need the county board to help fund this. Let's bring MCTS to the table to see what would make the most sense. So I think building a coalition of all the stakeholders is really the first step to doing this, makes it more democratic. And then, maybe we do a pilot program for a year and then survey the students again after the pilot program, so that we can show the impact that it had on their lives.
Is that kind of your philosophy overall? Getting people's opinions and their concerns directly from the source?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, when I was in college, we were active in Occupy Milwaukee, and we thought for sure that if we thought we knew what the community wanted, right? So we thought, okay, police brutality in this community is the primary concern. And so we went door to door and we had the survey, and we asked all of the neighbors in this neighborhood what their primary concern was. And we thought, okay, it's going to be police brutality, right? And it wasn't, it was the garbage. And so we're like, okay, well, let's go help them pick up the garbage. And what we did was we had some days where we, told the neighbors we're going to go do this to help them. We were going to shovel, pick up the garbage. And then we put all the garbage together in front of this house. And then we put it was like an abandoned house. And we put a sign on it that said, "Banks and politicians made this mess." And so, you do have to listen to people to figure out what the primary issues are. And I think if we're listening to students, there's student groups that have been surveying their peers, and they're saying the biggest issue right now is the school food. And so we have to do something about that. And, maybe my biggest concern in MPS isn't necessarily what the students are, but I think if, as a school board member, I would listen to my constituents, listen to students and families, and make sure that, we're writing policies and sticking to those policies.
How do you draw out those opinions and those concerns from students and parents?
Sure. I mean, you meet with them. MPS has what's called a district advisory council, where there's elected parents from every school that meet once a month. And so as a school board member, you can go to the district advisory council and you can listen to the parents and you can sit there and talk before the meeting with them. As a parent, I used to participate in the DAC, and, if there was a school board member there, I could talk to them.
What else would you do in your first year on the school board?
Another thing that I would love to see happen on the school board is us taking a closer look at our human resources department. We have this massive teacher exodus right now. We're really struggling to attract and retain teachers. And I've been hearing from a lot of educators that it takes a really long time to get hired by MPS and to actually get in the classroom. And so my fear is that we're losing a lot of really talented educators to other school districts or schools because we're taking too long to recruit them. So I think taking a closer look at human resources and figuring out why, what's the barrier and where are opportunities to speed this up, so that we're not losing people who really want to work in the district. And that same line, we also have to look at the way we are enrolling students. When I enrolled Max into MPS, it was kind of a cumbersome process. My online form wasn't working, and so I called the district to let them know my form wasn't working, and I didn't get a call back. And I also didn't know what school I wanted to send them to, so I called the district and asked, okay, this is where we live, what schools do you recommend? And they were very hesitant to talk to me about the different schools, and they told me just to call the schools directly. If you call the schools directly, they'll give you a tour, but there's no one there holding the hands of families who are trying to navigate what's a really big school system. I mean, MPS has over 130 schools. So there's a lot of choices for families who want to be in MPS. And so I think if we can make the enrollment process easier, if we can help parents, make sure we're calling them back immediately when they're calling, helping, give tours. There has to be a better way. And we know that's something that private schools do. I mean, if you ask a private voucher school, if you apply at a private voucher school, immediately you'll get a letter like, welcome, Rocketeer, come to our open house. And that's not something MPS does. And I think we can do it. I know we can do it. It's not rocket science. We just have to make sure that the people in those positions have, the power and authority to be able to do that. Maybe what happens is maybe there's just a hesitancy to actually walk parents through that. And so we just have to figure out what's going on and give some more help to the enrollment department so that the first touch every family has in MPS is a supportive one.
If you're on the school board, what will your relationship be like with the MTEA, the teachers union for the MPS?
That's a really good question. So I worked for the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association for about 3 years as their communication director. And someone actually asked me this. They're like, well, will you be beholden to the teachers union if you're on the school board? And, that comment really frustrates me because I think it shows a really deep misunderstanding of what the MTA is. So the MTA is not an office on Bleat Street. The MTA is not one person. The MTA is a union of over 5,000 educators that wake up every morning with the sole purpose of loving our children. The well-being of our school district, the well-being of our students is directly linked to the well-being of our union and education workers. And so likewise, the survival of our public schools is linked to the survival of the teachers union. I take my commitment to educators very seriously and will absolutely work with the union as well as families and students because we're all a community and we're all in this together. So that's what my relationship with the MTA means to me. I think a lot of my advocacy comes from sitting in school board meetings since Max, actually, even before Max went to MPS, I was sitting in MPS school board meeting. So when he was in kindergarten, and he's 13 now. So, you learn a lot by watching what's possible, what we've already done, but also by what's still missing.
What drew you to the MTA meetings in the beginning?
So I was involved in a community coalition called Schools and Communities United. Bob Peterson actually asked me to help out with some social media work they were doing. And it was a coalition of a bunch of community organizations that were fighting to defend our MPS from a state-mandated takeover of our public schools. So I was doing work with SCU, and MTA was one of the community members that sat on that coalition. And so that's where I met a lot of the union leaders and educators and just activists. Marva Herndon, who's also on the school board, she was in that coalition. She's done some amazing advocacy work with the city, bringing transparency to the city chartering process. Her and her friend Gail, they were in a group called, I think, Women for Informed Community, maybe, but we called them the Snoop Sisters because they were always finding things that some of the private schools were doing that were really harmful to students and calling them out. She did a lot of advocacy work around making sure that schools in the city had green space for kids at recess. But yeah, so I got involved with MTA kind of through that community coalition, developed some close ties to folks. And we worked really, really hard to make sure that we defeated that takeover. I mean, it's always still a threat kind of looming over MPS, the state takeover plan, but fortunately, we have not lost any schools to it so far.
Were there any lessons learned from that takeover attempt you went through?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going away. We are not going to let them take our schools. And so the lesson probably to the privatizers is we're not going away. We're going to continue to keep fighting because we know that the future of public schools in Milwaukee is on the line. I mean, there's some people that do not believe in public schools. You've seen it happen in New Orleans. You've seen it happen in Detroit. So there's a very real possibility that if we don't stand up and fight back, that public schools as we know it will cease to exist in Milwaukee.
That was a conversation with Missy Zombor, who's running for the school board of Milwaukee Public Schools. If you like what you heard and want to learn more or how to get involved in her campaign, check out the link below. Thank you for listening.